If you think about it, when you have a nice, rich color, it's probably a mid-value that you're working with. If it's very dark, or even if it's very light, it doesn't have a lot of color strength, color presence. So the color lives in the mid-values, as Frank likes to say. So for bright autumn foliage and the bright light on the building, and actually even the shadow area on the building, those are going to be nice, rich, bright colors to make this look like a happy, sunny autumn afternoon. But I am going to start in the light areas. There's a lot of sky there, you can see it, that needs to be filled in. Cerulean is going to go in there first, very lightly actually. And by the way, I do squeeze out fresh paint. I used to work with the dry paint in the wells, but as I finally got really used to working with a lot of water, the colors were washed out. So I started squeezing out fresh, because it's the best way to get good fresh color. And if you use sables, the sables hold so much water that the colors will get muted really easily. They get washed out with all the water. So I started squeezing fresh out. It's also a way to limit the palette. And I use clips to hold the paper on, but I start out, these two at the bottom will stay until I work down in that area, but I can work up there at the top and just get this sky in. Again, I want it really light, so I'm putting on strokes of paint, and then I am working carefully around the building, but I'm just trying to get the color in. Pops of color. When I work my way over towards where this foliage is going to be, I'm using a lot of water. I want a little hint of the blue in the background, but
what's the weight of your paper?
This is Arches 140 cold press. I like the Arches surface, although you might be aware that they were bought by Cotman probably about 10 years ago now. And I've just been waiting for them to change it. And I've started noticing in the new sheets that I've bought a little hint of too much sizing on them. I always liked Arches because it was absorbent, so that when you were using a lot of water, like I do, the paper really helps you manage those big washes, those big areas of wet paper that you're working with. I usually, if it's a blue sky and whether it's summer or no matter what season it is, if there's a blue sky in there, I like to get a pop of something really blue. And the front of this building, once it's lit up, is really going to be, I hope, the main focus of the painting right there. So I will put that pop of color right up in here, right up, sort of above it, a little bit off to the left, but right above it. And it's just another way to get the eye from that edge down into the painting. And again, it's very wet, so there's some brush strokes that you can see on there a little bit, but they'll blend in and fade as that wash dries. I'm actually going to get a little bit of the andanthrine and put it up there as well. Andanthrine is a muted cool blue. It's dark. Very dark, actually. When you need good darks, andanthrine is hard to beat. And it's a great substitute for phthalo blue if you don't happen to like phthalo blue, which I don't like phthalo blue. All right, so I've got that in. That background is really wet, and there's some, again, bright foliage on this tree over here. I'm going to go ahead and get some of those patches of foliage in. I think I'll use those. So I've got a 3/4 inch angled flat for this work. And I'll put out the cadmium yellow. So I'll start with that. Maybe get a little bit of glycerin in it just to make it orange. I got too much alizarin in it, actually. And this is a little bit thicker. Actually, it's a lot thicker than the wash that I initially started with. But with that and the side of the brush and some careful work, I can start to put in masses of foliage. And as you can see, not only am I going to have sort of a dark light value arrangement, it's going to be a lot of complementary relationship in here too. So orange against blue in this case. I have some, I don't know if you can see them, I have some very, very light pencil lines that sort of outline where I plan to put foliage, bits of foliage. And I'm working into this already wet area because I get soft blends, soft transitions. I avoid hard edges. I'm not a big fan of hard edges. And they are easy to produce when you're not working with enough water or you're working on a dry surface. And at the same time, they're very hard to undo once they're there and they're dry.
Yeah.
And again, by putting these quick marks in, trying to avoid anything that looks too angular, but I get these in on this wet surface and they'll mix and blend by themselves. And I can already go, now that I've got this in, and I mentioned that the deep gold is a really good, I didn't put out deep gold. It's a really good color to use for shadows in foliage. Quinacridones are nice and transparent for one thing, but they also have good color strength, and deep gold is, you can see it on the palette, it looks like it's brown there, but it's really a rich yellow, yellow-orange. So it darkens, shades, bright things like bright foliage really easily and quickly, and still keeps the transparency, keeps it nice and light.
Tony, what was the one that they discontinued? Was that Quinacridone Gold?
I am not sure about that.
Oh, because
but the two of them are very similar, and the deep gold I find more useful. I used to have quinacridone gold. Used to use it actually.
it was an automotive color, and the taste changed. That one went out. I thought it was gold.
Yeah, it might have been. It wouldn't surprise me. So hopefully you can see on the screen this area of foliage that's sort of underneath everything, right? It sits back. It actually runs behind the tree. It's darker and shadier, but it's not too dark that it looks oppressive. It does need to come out this side of the tree, though. The ground plane here in the foreground, both the field, this road, this grassy field over here to the right, all of that is light value area, so I do want to get some color in there. And speaking of deep gold, actually, and believe it or not, cerulean blue, that combination makes a really nice sort of low intensity green. Cerulean is not a great mixer. It really loses its identity in mixes, but it does provide a lot of sedimentation, which gives you some texture in those areas that might need it. I love cerulean, but you have to use it carefully. It also muddies up really quickly. It's a dense color that it's sedimentary nature makes it prone actually to being muddy. You have to use it with a lot of water. Same color on this side. You can see that's a little bit bluer, but I'm going to leave it. I like these sort of incomplete mixtures. Incomplete mixtures on the palette, because what happens then is the colors can mix on the paper. There's going to be a cast shadow back there, but I'm going to paint through it. And using a big brush, I'm going to run these brush strokes in the direction of the field. But using a big brush like this keeps me from getting too fussy about things. The road is probably a dirt road, not that it has to be. Let's see. There'll be some burnt sienna and danthorine. I've already got danthorine out here, so I'll use it. And get something sort of gray-brown. And again, it's supposed to be part of the light value area, so I'll keep it light. The one thing about using these bulldog clips is when the paper is wet, that corner is okay, but this corner is wet. If I clip that down, it's going to leave a dent in the paper. So I'm not going to do it right at this moment. There's a puddle right here, so I'm going to paint around that. And there's going to be cast shadow back there, but I'm going to get this color in anyway. And then, as I mentioned, I don't like hard edges, so where I've got hard edges setting up, I actually should grab this brush. I get a nice, clean, clear wash on the brush, and I let those edges blend so that they don't leave behind hard edges that might be seen through a later wash. And while I'm waiting for that, you can see I've got some, it's not really blooming, it's some blending or bleeding that's happening here. I'm just going to go over that. There's a hard edge at the bottom of the tree, which I don't want either. You want those things like trees and fence posts and weeds, the bottom edge of the barn. You want those to blend gently into the grass, essentially the field that surrounds them. So that means you need soft edges. I think I can continue. I'm going to work on the tree trunk. So I have this grayish color that I put on the road, and I'm going to work with that, I think. So that's in danthorine blue and burnt sienna. And I can use a version of that for the tree. This time a little bit, leaning a little bit cooler, more towards gray, if you will. Blue-gray. Try to get a little bit of rough edge along both sides really of this trunk. Just gives a little hint of, again, that rough texture that you see, the rough bark the rough surface that you see on most trees. I'm going to warm this down here because it's actually catching light. And there's some, you can see some indanthrine that was kind of a blob on the brush is in there, but I'm okay with that. There's kind of accidents. In this case, it's a little bit blue, but I can tone the blue down later if I need to. But it leaves a little bit of texture behind. And then the leaves themselves will be reflecting color into especially the shadier areas of the tree. So I'm going to add that in now. And it's essentially the same color I used up there in the foliage itself. And then it's, excuse me, it's going to be a little bit shadier up in the higher parts of the tree, especially with the foliage blocking the light. So I'm going to get that in with some darker color. And maybe down here, maybe this branch is casting a little bit of a shadow. We'll get that in. And again, this is all still wet, so I can go back and blend, adjust, change. If something is there that I don't want, which isn't the case, but if there's something there I don't want, I can lift it still at this point, which is why I like to work so wet. First of all, it brings out the best of the medium, but secondly, the wetter you work, the more time you have to actually work in the painting. And again, some more of that bounced light back in the shady side of that tree. The barn is a red barn, I suppose. Right? They all are, aren't they? But this is the lit side. It's going to have bright light on it, and it's part of the light value area. So that means I'm going to make this really, really light. And then on the shady side, I used a mixture of alizarin and some other brown stuff that was already on the palette on the lit side. Actually deep gold will work really well. And some alizarin with cerulean. Actually, it makes this really nice dusky violet. the cerulean sort of disappears, but it becomes dark and leans towards purple or violet. This is the annex building there, a little shed that's attached. And you can see I added more of the cerulean in there on that side. There's going to be a little light there, so there's going to be cast shadow in here and light over there, and then we switch back into the really shady side of the building here. The roof could be something grayish. At this point, my palette looks like this. So I've got all kinds of colors to choose from there, and if I don't find one that suits me for whatever I'm doing, I'll just mix it. But with all of that color puddled on that palette, I really have a lot of choices. I'm going to leave the edges of the... I'm standing here wondering why I can't see this, and this is why.
So you had two value studies. What was the difference between the two? I couldn't really see.
There really ended up being no difference between them.
Okay.
I had one on there that I wasn't crazy about, and I was telling somebody on the drive over, I was thinking about it and decided what I would do. And so I did it on one, and then I changed the other one to actually fit and work with essentially they're the same.
Do you always do a value thumbnail for a sketch?
I won't say always, but very often, yeah. I learned my lesson. I used to not, and it turned out that all those things all those teachers were trying to tell me, they were right about it. All right, back here in the back we've got a hill. I want it to really fade and recede into the background. So I'm getting out cerulean, I'm just mingling it around in a puddle here, sort of making it gray. I want it grayer than that. There's some autumn trees back there too, we'll get to those in a second. I wanted to have the character of those hills, which, you know, I'm really lucky to see this time of the year in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
They've just become modeled with all of those different colors, warms and cools, and that's what I want these to have the character of. Down here where there's going to be some autumn trees, I'm just going to get clear water and blend this down. And I'll go back in for the autumn tree color in a second. Again, I'm blending with clear water so I don't have those hard edges which might become distractions later. Okay, so these distant trees, there's autumn foliage on them, this kind of orange color. I'm mingling it over the background hill, so it mutes it. It's not going to be as bright as the tree up here in the foreground, but it'll still be there, should have a nice presence. There's a branch of the tree I didn't put in. I'm going to have to go back and do that. And see what happened there. This looks very like that, which I don't want it to because this foliage is much closer. This needs to be more muted. So since I put it on with, I think, fairly wet paint, I can just blend some clear water in and it softens it and mutes it. Later, if need be, I'll, which I probably will need to, I'll go in and darken this foliage here as well. This is some of that cerulean and alizarin mixture down under the darker parts of those trees. It probably looks like I'm not being very careful with my brush strokes, which I'm not really. But at this stage of the painting, I'm just getting large shapes in, the large representations of various objects. And there's a bad spot here. That's really the only objective right now, is to get these larger shapes in, to sort of get the composition laid in fairly well. And then I can work on all of that other stuff that needs to be done as the painting develops. The cupolas, shady side of the cupolas. And again, there would probably be some warm light bouncing in there. I'm going to put some of that in.
Do you always work on just one painting at a time, or will you have a couple going sometimes?
I might have others in other media going. I never have more than one watercolor going at a time. I find that I really have to pay so close attention to it that I can't have more than one. I used to, when I was doing a lot of plein air, I would have a painting going and something going in the sketchbook at the same time. And I found that I couldn't do it, because then I was taking my attention away from the painting and something bad would happen. I'd see it, there'd be a bloom developing or something, and I would have missed it because I was working in the sketchbook, so I stopped doing it.
Tony, if you can go to natural break point anytime in the next 10 minutes, so.
Yeah, it's I'm about to hit one, so
Okay.
that's perfect actually. I think I'm going to let what's on there dry and peruse it actually while it is drying.
That's fine.
So again, I'm not sure how many I had, but they're all gone.
Here's an extra one, because I'll take a picture.
All right, so we're going to keep moving here. I think that's dry enough.
Here's an extra one. Does anybody want one? Thank
So I do have a lot of color on the paper. In general, that composition is there. The light, certainly the light areas are there. The darker areas, some of the, which are really mid-value areas, they're there, but they need to be pushed up a little bit. And we need a little bit of indication of details about the subject. So I'm trying to decide where I'm going next. I think what I'll do is go to these trees. There's three, I think I've got three tree trunks sitting in there. And these are trees with autumn foliage on them. This area should be really mid-value area, part of the darker part of the painting. In through there, it includes the shadow side of the building, some of the area back here in the background. So I'm going to start darkening those up, adding the cast shadows. The tree itself, it's supposed to be lighter here and then darker in the back. So I'll start putting, I think, some layers on to get some shade on the tree. And again, I want to pull up the darker value areas. I've got a palette that is got plenty of color on it, but I'm going to mix up a little bit more. And again, for the trees over here, I'm going to do kind of the same thing I did for the tree here. Masses of foliage. These are going to be darker though. And in fact, I'm getting out, I haven't used birdseed, I have used birdseed, but I'm going to get some of that out.
What's your theory on square brushes versus round brushes?
They both have their uses. I like flats a lot, actually, when I'm painting larger, and I like the rounds when I'm painting smaller. But they both have their, I use them both, and they both have their uses. So I don't know, I don't have a preference if that's part of your question. I don't really have a preference. I use the one that I need for whatever I'm doing.
I'm just saying you get a lot of interesting shapes out of the flat.
Yeah, and a couple people have commented on that. If you notice how I'm holding it for one thing, and I'm constantly turning it. And that just takes a little bit of practice. It's not the kind of thing that generally you're taught. If anybody ever took a workshop with Tony Couch, he does that. All right, and I want to go back in the background and actually get this a bit darker. I mentioned Tony Couch's name. The first workshop I ever took when I decided I was going to do this seriously was 1989, and I took a workshop with Tony Couch and learned a good bit from him. And one of the things I learned was twisting the brush. Just want to make sure these trees look like they're tall enough. I'm gonna get some of that darker value back in here. I believe it is. This area, I've got some foliage looking color back there, but this is supposed to be darker than that.
Is that mostly burnt sienna?
Burnt sienna and dancing blue. And I'm gonna go up on, again, the shady side of this tree. I've got some nice light glow there that I don't want to interrupt. And I want to connect the bottom of the tree to its shadow, so that's what I'm doing now. I like a rough edge along here, so I'm going to drag the brush and see if I can get that. A little bit of shadow right in here, I think. Color-wise, I'm just grabbing stuff off the palette at this point. So there's a big, really messy puddle there, and again, it's got all kinds of colors in it. So I'm just picking up the stuff that seems to work for the area that I'm working on. A little bit more of the deep gold in here just to darken some parts of this foliage that's really deeper in the shadows. You know, you create light, the representation of light in a painting through contrast, and deepening this actually helps that. And I'm going to get a little bit more of it over here as well. And in the process I can refine these leaf mass shapes a little bit where it's needed. Quinacridone colors, I may have already said it, they're extremely transparent. They're great for layering. So if you find something needs a little bit of value, some darker value, or a hit for color strength. The quinacridones are great for that. You know, I need readers when I'm at a certain distance, and I don't need them when I'm at another distance, and I'm constantly taking them on and off and on and off. I'm going to get some of that warm glow under this branch. Maybe that's it. All right, so the building is also casting shadow. And it's part of that darker area of the painting, and I want to get that in. Across the road, you know, we've got that late fall light, so the shadows are long. Maybe coming to a peak there. I didn't plan for this, but I'm going to put shadow coming down the hill over here. Maybe two. Letting them blend out a little bit, soften up. The farther a shadow is from the object that casts it, the softer the edges are. Write that down in your tip book.
Read about it in the physics book.
Yeah. I haven't done anything with that puddle yet. The overhang of the building would be casting shadow on this part of the building. And that's an important symbol really for the light. Again, I like to rough that edge up a little bit. And up in here, darker. And a little bit of indication of warm bounced light, probably up under the eave right here. I'm going to do that with yellow.
Arulian?
I'm using, actually I am picking up Arulian. I meant to pick up the cadmium yellow. So no, cadmium yellow. This corner of the building would be darker. Anybody know what that's called? Plane change accent. So where you have a square corner, where the plane changes
Yeah.
from here to here, it's almost always, not always, but almost always darker right where that plane changes. And in a painting, really exaggerating it works really well to show the difference between the lit side and the shady side. There's one here as well. I'm going to have some cast shadow on the building, essentially this building casting shadow on that building. So I'm going to get some of that in here. And again, some warm bounced light up under here.
Do you worry about lifting when you run over the drive under painting?
No, it usually doesn't lift. Sometimes I have that problem, but usually it doesn't. So no, I don't worry about it too much. If it does lift up something underneath, it's usually, even if it does, it's usually not a problem. So.
Well, for me, it usually lifts, it usually is a problem.
Well, what kind of paper do you work on?
Arches, but I'm probably just going too slow and methodically. And just pick up the pace.
Papers like arches that are pretty absorbent, once they're dry, usually the pigment is attached pretty well to the fiber and shouldn't come up. So you might be working when it's not dry enough.
Yeah.
That might be the reason.
Yeah.
So you're continuing to work. I like to say in classes, the time not to work on your paper is when it's damp.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know? It's not shiny. You look at it, it's not shiny, but it feels cool.
Mhm.
It's damp. But that's the most dangerous time to work on the paper. You're likely to get blooms and mud and lifting of color that you don't want to lift, all because the pigment hasn't had a chance to attach itself to the fiber yet. I learned that from Tony Couch in 1989.
Well, I learned it from you.
Some darker areas of shadow on these branches where the foliage is really blocking the light. What color is it? It's just a dark color that I'm finding on the palette. So nothing specific. Maybe even up here it's really dark. There's foliage higher up that's blocking the light maybe. Let me work on the puddle. So one of the reasons I wanted the puddle there was to reflect this dark, shady side of the building. And that means I'm going to get some dark, not that dark, but dark color in there. Flats are great for this. So somebody was asking about flat brushes. Flats are great for puddles and reflections. Usually the back edge of the puddle is dark, and then the reflection is vertical. And then there's contrast with the lighter reflections, the light areas, the sky, the light front of the building. There's contrast with it that really make it read like a puddle. You can see I've got some of the ground cover in there, but it'll work out okay if I'm careful about getting these reflections in and actually, again, getting that dark, the dark edge on the back. And then I have good strong verticals in there, but I soften edges. I really don't like hard edges in my painting, so I work tirelessly to not have them. I do have some on the edge of the tree there and everything, but for the most part, I like soft edges and rough edges rather than hard edges. It's so easy to get hard edges with this medium, and it's almost as easy actually to get the soft edges, and not quite as easy to get the rough edges, but the soft edges are pretty easy. Gray wash again, I want some warm glow up in there, so I'm picking up some warm. Okay, I put the foliage in on these trees, and now I'm going to put in the darker trunks. Really some light on that trunk. And again, soft edges at the bottom. It lets and helps those trees sit down in the grass. I'm getting out this small brush for the first time. How many of you get the small brush out right at the beginning of the painting? Be honest. Not too many, that's good. I don't know how many instructors told me that over and over and over again when I was learning. And I finally got it through my head. I like the light setup. I like the overall composition. Again, the lights in the middle values together. I think it's really time to probably start working on some details. Oh, it's 8:30. So what time are we supposed to stop? 8:30?
Quarter of, so you've got about 10 minutes.
Okay. 10 minutes, so I've got 10 minutes worth of details to put in. No, that's okay. So some cast shadow right here, which is, hopefully you can tell on the screen, very bright cerulean blue actually. There's a doorway opening. So the door that's here partially open on the barn is set back actually into the wall, and I really wanted to get that in, so I'm going to do that. At the bottom edge of an open barn door, I tend to warm it up, lighten it and warm it as if there's some light getting in there. And again, then you get the contrast between the little bit of ambient light that's here and the darker area above at the ceiling level where there's really no light getting in. And it makes those doorways a little bit more lively than they would be otherwise. And then there's cast shadow, so there's a the door is actually set back in the doorway opening. So that little bit of overlap there is casting a shadow on the door. That's what this is. As is the overhang part. On the inside of those doors, actually right along this edge, I'm darkening it, but it would, I better let that dry. I'm going to do it with something warm. In this case, it's deep gold. I believe I had this in as a 4-pane window. Cast shadow under the overhang up here. A little bit of warmth on the front of those cupolas. Likewise here, a little bit of warmth, catching some sunlight there. Might be a little bit of cast shadow right under here. I don't know what kind of siding is on this barn, but I'm going to make it horizontal siding. Framing around the window. The barn door, I think I'm going to have vertical siding. Maybe another window back here. I've got a white strip back here where I was really careful to paint around the edge of the roof with the mountain color, but that needs to be joined to something, either the mountain or the roof. I'm going to join it to the roof. And actually I can get some, since there's light on those cupolas, actually there'd be a cast shadow here. But they would be casting shadows of their own, so I can get those in as well. there needs to be some blue in the sky up here, so I'm gonna go get some cerulean and find the cleanest place I can find on the palette, which there aren't many.
You have a policy to not clean your palette in the middle of a painting?
Yes, it's an absolute necessity. No, I don't really have a policy, I'm just hurrying right now, so. And I picked up color in there, see it's sort of, it's slow, actually it's the dirty water. Here's my clean water.
You went thirsty in here?
No, not really. The painting is more thirsty than I am. So I'm going to let that warmth infuse the whole sky, areas that still have some white paper on them.
We've just got another minute or two, you know, one more thing, or?
No, I think I can leave it there. Oh, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We can leave the chairs here.